Have you ever played the game and wondered, what does the science say about this? Well, I managed to read every single article about the game that I'm currently obsessed with, the card game Spades, in order to answer that question. And what I found is that basically the studies can be classified along three main dimensions. Let's start with computer science and AI, one of the hot topics of our time. As with many other games, it's also where you can find the most research papers on Spades. Can AI win against humans in competitive gaming? The answer to that is more and more a clear yes. It has been decided for different games at different times. Famously in '97, when the Deep Blue engine first defeated the world champion in chess. 1 year later was also when they won their first tournament in bridge, a game that shares a lot of similarities with Spades. And the mastermind behind many of those successes is an algorithm called Monte Carlo tree search, which is basically the ultimate AI gambler. From each situation in the game, it is able to generate all possible outcomes of a decision deep into the future. And from that enlightened standpoint, it is able to assign the perfect value to each option, calculating risk and reward with a precision no human could possibly match. But it also regularly leads to unintuitive outcomes that seem weird or even incompetent from a human player's perspective, which is a problem for an AI Spades site like AI Factory that rely on players feeling comfortable with the choices their AI partners make. So they have helped conduct a couple of studies about how to make the AI's choices seem more human-like.
Half beast, half machine.
And since humans generally rely on rules of thumb and heuristics to navigate complexity, the researchers have managed to show that analogously, if the algorithm was substituted with some hard-coded rules, it was possible to, for the most part, maintain the skill level of the AI, while at the same time making it more relatable to players. I've actually played quite a bit on the site where a lot of this research was based on. And while I think they did a good job with the difficulty compared to other sites, I think it's still difficult to replicate a game that draws so much of its appeal from deciphering the subtle intentions communicated with each card of your teammate and exploiting the very human imperfections in your opponents that the AI has such a hard time accurately imitating. You have to wonder, even if it could perfectly capture human behavior, would it ever really feel right for most people? Or if there's something about just knowing that it's not a real human that takes away something essential from the experience? Which is maybe the reason why some sites are seemingly trying to make it more and more indistinguishable to recognize whether you're playing against the AI or against real humans.
You never said anything about an android being on board, why not?
But more on the exact human thought processes that players have during a game was explored in another study that basically asks to what extent the skills used while playing Spades can be of value for other parts of our lives. So part of what he did was look at a group of African American students who were playing the game a lot and exactly analyze what type of evaluation they make while playing the game. And the keyword for him to make a bridge between in-game skills and broader life abilities is modeling. Similar to how scientists make tentative models of reality in order to then test their predictive power, Spades players create and reason with various mental models during the game in order to make the decisive play in this situation, for example, where me and my partner are trying to make one of our opponents get a point by being forced to play the highest card of a suit, while his teammate is trying to prevent that. When trying to estimate what kind of Spades cards the player on my left might be holding, you can hear me pretty much go exactly through the steps of a type of modeling called hypothetical deductive modeling, which is at the core of the argument of his paper. So I play the 9. Thought process is he has only made 1 out of his 3 points, so he probably has a high spade left, because it's plausible that his teammate has only a 10 or a jack of spades. So he kind of has to protect with a higher card. Let's see what happens. And it's not just the reasoned speculation about what cards someone may be holding. but more so the development, testing and revision of action-oriented models that apply across situations. So there does appear to be an analogy then to general critical thinking skills. And indeed, the authors point to a similar study that has shown a correlation between people who practice the game a lot and general cognitive abilities such as perspective taking and holding multiple goals and evaluations in mind at once. But I also know from psychology studies that a skill in one regard is not necessarily transferable to another field. To combat overgeneralizing, I do appreciate the granularity with which he breaks down the different skills and their potential here and embeds them in further theories about identity and the broader sociocultural context. As an educator, his goal with studies like this is to point at untapped potential that students might have, as well as challenge stereotypes about African American students, among whom games like this are popular. And with this cultural angle in mind, let's move on to our final study, which is maybe my favorite one, and that is the cultural science poetry analysis. So yeah, definitely not the hard sciences anymore. And the story behind this one is that there's this poem about Spades called "We Should Make a Documentary About Spades" from an acclaimed poet, Terrance Hayes. Now we have some Indonesian scholars who are trying to study this poem as an expression of American culture in their American studies. I think it is interesting to them because Spades as a game is historically quite rooted in the African American culture. A connection which the scientists link to the fact that the game was created in the southern US during the time of the Great Depression, where black people were often the first to lose their jobs due to cost-cutting measures. So the poet also uses the game in part as a vehicle to reflect on his cultural heritage.
We should explore the origins of a derogatory word like spade, as well as the word for feeling alone in polite company.
Expressing that not much is known about his history, he imagines Spades games being played at different critical moments of it, starting from the first European colonialist arriving, co-opting Africans into ships to later turn them into slaves. He then goes on to describe Spades games that capture more recent moments of black history, even creatively imagining a Spades game being played between Malcolm X, MLK and other important figures of that history.
Who do you suppose would win if Booker T and MLK were matched against Du Bois and Malcolm X in a game of spades? You say don't talk across the table, pay attention to the suits being played.
And he weaves those historical accounts into his own memories of how he has played the game in the past with his friends and family. And I think that's where the strength of poetry lies, being able to weave different layers of life into each other in order to create a narrative that can bring up new perspectives and reflections, even for some scientists halfway across the world. And he ends the poem on the unifying note that there are no enemies in Spades, speaking perhaps to the sentiment that a game like this, if just for a short time, can kind of transcend political or economic divides and make connections outside of those limiting frameworks. I think with all the new opportunities that technology and AI provide to make gaming a more immersive experience, I still think good games like art can be more than just a quick distraction from life, but that, as the last two studies imply, they can also create spaces for personal development and meaningful connections within the community around it. And there of course comes the question that we can all ask ourselves. What can you do to foster those types of communities for the games you play?